Is everybody sitting comfortably? Yes? Okay. This is our second plenary. I'm sorry we're starting a little bit late. We've had problems just setting up the generator because we don't want the internet connection to go down. So we're a little bit late, but in Egyptian terms, that's not too bad at all. It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce our next speaker, plenary speaker, Leil Zahra Murtada, who is a very special kind of person. I have been instructed not to use he or she. They are committed to gender issues, and he has she. Oh God, I'm going to get it wrong, I know, but I have been instructed not to use he or she, but to use they. And Leil has had a very long history of activism. You can see I'm working very hard at not using a pronoun at all. Born and raised. Yes, you're getting cheers from the audience. Born and raised in the south of Lebanon, where they witnessed the brutality of war very early on in life, and became an activist from a very early age. As an adult, Leil participated in the international movement to stop the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and when that failed to stop the invasion, and the invasion did take place, unfortunately, Leil went to Baghdad about 3 weeks after the US troops entered the city, very dangerous period, and spent a couple of months there training young activists in Iraq to start an indie media initiative, and then went on to the north of Iraq, to Kurdistan, and spent a couple of months there, I believe. Leil can tell us more later. And then spent the following years doing activism in various places, but predominantly Spain, where Leil worked on issues of gender, sexuality, various forms of oppression, and particularly, I think, particularly also more recently, on the treatment and rights of migrants, of immigrants. Leil moved very recently to Berlin, so Leil is going to speak to us from Berlin today. And the reason we're having this Skype interview or conversation is that Leil unfortunately was denied a visa to enter Egypt, to the disappointment and outrage of many of Leil's friends. And Leil does have a lot of friends in this country. Leil is really an honorary Egyptian citizen, although of Lebanese origin. And so Leil kindly agreed to talk to us by Skype, but didn't want to have this kind of monologue with an audience that they're not physically in the room. And so what we've agreed is that we have it as a kind of conversation. I will be posing some broad questions just to get Leil going, and he can see the audience. I don't know if you can see me, but you can see the audience. And so I'll start with just a warm-up with some questions based on knowledge I have of Leil that came through various means, but predominantly through an interview I did with Leil in February, almost a year ago, February last year in Barcelona. So I'll start with these questions, and then Leil can take them in any direction they want, right? I'm really trying hard.
You're doing a very good job.
I'm doing all right. You're not going to stop talking to me if I use he or she, will you? No.
No, not at all.
Okay. Okay, well, let's start with the first issue, shall we say. I think, Leil, from what we discussed earlier in the interview last year, it seems that your interest and involvement in translation predates the Words of Women from the Egyptian Revolution Project, which is the main topic of Leil's talk, and many of you will be familiar with this project. Those who aren't will know more about it shortly, but your interest in translation predates the Words of Women initiative, particularly translation in the context of activism and protest. And it predates even your earlier involvement with Moserine, because Leil also did a fair bit of work with Moserine. And what I like about this early involvement is I find it very interesting because it really offers a unique insight into how activists in different parts of the world who speak different languages and live in different places get to exchange information and develop new tactics in ways that people don't talk about most of the time. So I want you to, if possible, to start talking about what I might call the tear gas project. In 2011, in early 2011, you set up a list called Translate Revolution, which wasn't restricted to solidarity with protesters in Egypt or even in the Arab world, but also extended to offering solidarity through translation to protesters in Iran. So can you tell us something about this early initiative and the blog that went with it, the Muqawma Sha'biyya, popular resistance blog, and how it contributed to developing these shared tactics among protesters that we tend to take for granted?
أولا مساء الخير. I'm really upset that I couldn't make it, but I mean, you should blame the regime and not me and not the conference organizers. I'm hoping that the ban is on all Lebanese people and not just against me, because this means that I would be able to make it one day. So talking a bit about what you call the tear gas project, I like the name. Because it actually started with tear gas. It was at the beginning of when the uprising and the revolution started in Tunisia. I was in Barcelona and I didn't know exactly what to do from there. And having been involved in a lot of international mobilizations and having friends who have been doing work on tear gas, I thought that what I could do is just translate some of the guides on how to deal with tear gas and how to work with the first aid during demonstrations and against police repression. Slowly, the project extended into other aspects because mainly it was not only tear gas that is being used, and we started getting emails from different countries asking for all different kinds of information. And the interesting part was how Iran got into the project. We got an email from a group of activists who said that they're witnessing a weird kind of gas that is being used there, and they had no information about it. So what we did was send emails to different activist groups around the world and explain to them, sending the testimonies, sending photos and videos that were sent to us from Iran, and asking them have they seen this gas before. The translation in the beginning was mainly from English into Arabic, but once Iran got introduced, we included Farsi. We managed to get some information about this gas in English, and we looked for translators to do it in Farsi. Actually, I was just most of the time I'm credited for projects that I've been involved in, but most of the work hasn't been done by me. It was done by the people who joined these projects. I usually just start something, and then a whole long list of amazing people actually do the biggest load of the work, the translation and the editing and the medical research and all of these things. So the tear gas project is something that I started, but I'm not the one who was behind it. There was a long list of people who were working in different countries around the world, and basically putting into practice what we've learned, mainly activists in Europe through the anti-G8, anti-WTO, anti-World Trade Organization, anti-World Bank protests that were happening between 1999 to 2006. Yeah.
You okay? you put your head down. I wasn't sure whether you were looking for something.
No.
It's not easy to have a conversation kind of virtually, but you're doing very well. I think the message is coming across. Okay, we'll move a little bit closer to the Words of Women project, which everybody wants to hear about. But I think this is an important precursor we need to talk about. When we talked in Barcelona about a year ago, you said in relation to the couple of weeks you spent in Kurdistan in 2003, I mentioned earlier that when Leil went to Iraq, they ended up in Kurdistan for a couple of months. So when you were talking about the couple of weeks, it was a couple of weeks or a couple of months?
In Kurdistan, a couple of weeks.
Couple of weeks. The couple of weeks you spent in Kurdistan in 2003, you said, and I quote, this is precisely what you told me at in the interview, "This was the first time I documented stories of women who've been through state oppression, female Kurdish political prisoners, and they changed my life," you said. So I imagine this experience must have fed into your later work on the words of women from the Egyptian Revolution. Can you tell us something about that period and how and what you documented there? I remember you saying that they were only audio recordings, for example, not video recordings. What women, how did you choose them? What did you do with it?
Actually, it was, yes, it did. I agree that it did change my life, and I still remember these interviews quite well, and they come to my head frequently, mainly because they were with women who had spent time in the Ba'athist prisons under Saddam Hussein. They were mainly from the communist Kurdish groups. Particularly, 3 of them were arrested when they were, I think, between 18 and 19 years old, and they spent like 10 years in jail before the invasion. 2 particular points that totally impacted me and still impact me until today. One is that the amount of torture stories that they told me and the amount of violence that they were through, and still they believed, like I remember one of them telling me that if time goes back, knowing that everything that happened to her would happen to her, that she would still go out on the street and distribute the flyers. She was arrested for distributing flyers, and she spent 10 years in jail, suffering all kinds of like sexual, gender violence, to all kinds of torture, seeing her friends getting killed in front of her in prison, and she was still insisting that she would still do it again. So this was very important for me to hear because of course, like once you're young and you start doing politics, the first thing that your parents, or the first thing that my parents told me was that, oh, it's a phase. Now when you're young, you become a communist, and then when you grow old, you'll just get a job and just go back to real life. So hearing this story was really important to see that, to go back and tell my parents that, no, this is not a phase. On the other hand, it was also, like the other point was the fact that the stories of these women were super rich, and they were super rich on so many levels, politically and on a human level, and they were not talked about. Like throughout the whole, before the invasion and after the invasion, it was like the stories of these women were completely like marginalized from the story and from the writing of history. People were more interested in what Muqtada Sadr is doing, but they were not interested in the popular resistance. And in history in general, we always hear about what leaders do, and leaders predominantly are male, predominantly internationally they're white men who are being documented in history, their stories are being documented, while revolutions are made by the people. Revolutions are made by the people who are out on the streets. Yeah, of course, like leaders do contribute, but I think, in my personal opinion, I think their contribution is minimal. If it wasn't for the thousands of people out on the street, these leaders could not do what they were doing. So that's when I started getting interested in mainly popular history, and thanks to a lot of amazing women and queer people that passed through my life and introduced me to the concept hair story, and that's where the name of the project later on came from. In Arabic, luckily, we do not have this distinction. In English, history is, within certain feminist circles, is interpreted as his story, and as a response to this, the term hair story was introduced to document basically the history of women, or the contribution of women to history.
Okay. Shall we move on to Words of Women now? That's what most people want to hear about. Now, I appreciate that a lot of people here are already familiar with this project, even though they may not be familiar with the thinking behind it. But because we also have a lot of people from abroad here who may not have seen the videos and they may not know what we're talking about, what I'd like to do is play a trailer, if Dina can help me. You have several trailers on the YouTube channel and on the Facebook page of Words of Women from the Egyptian Revolution, but I've chosen the trailer with Sanaa Saif in it as a tribute to Sanaa Saif, who is serving a prison sentence for merely protesting peacefully on the street. And as some of you know, Sana also comes from a family that has suffered considerably, all of them, from various forms of oppression. So I think we should pay tribute by looking at the trailer with Sana in. You can bear with us. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, Lail, but we'll. It's no. It's already loaded. So, you know. No. It's a file on the. I have a little Lail. We'll put you in the corner, Lail. And we don't have sound. No, we don't have sound. Okay, we try again.
أنا اسمي سناء صيف، عندي 17 سنة، في ثالثة ثانوي، دلوقتي عندي امتحانات يعني. ده من الناحية الدراسية. غير كده أنا بعمل جورنال مع مجموعة من الشباب، وعملنا زي جريدة مستقلة.
Oh yes, it's all right. No, that's right.
قبل 25 كنت بنزل مظاهرات كتير. أول مظاهرة نزلتها كانت خالد سعيد.
حولتك يا أبو خالد، حولتك يا أبو خالد، حولتك يا أبو خالد.
No, it's still hiding.
أنا من عيلة نشيطين جدا سياسيا، ودي كانت واحدة من الحاجات اللي مخلياني مش عايزة أشارك في مظاهرات من زمان يعني أنا أصلا كنت رافضة المظاهرات لأنه بس عشان مش عايزة أطلع زي أهلي. عملنا كردون قدامهم، وكانت أول مرة الكردون اللي يبقى قدام الأمن أيا كان نوع الأمن بقى يبقى فيه ستات ورجالة. أنا كنت واقفة في الكردون البشري اللي قدام العساكر، وكان بيني وما بين العسكري اللي قدامي حوالي متر. أنا مش هنسى منظر العسكري ده أبدا في حياتي يعني. كان واقف مش بيبص لي، هو باصص كده وواضح ان هو بيتجنب ان هو يبص لي وعمال يعيط. في لحظه كده لقيته بيقول حاجه ما سمعتش بيقول ايه، وبعدين قال لي امشي. سمعته وهو بيقول امشي، انا كنت فضلت واقفه، وبعدين فجاه بقى ابتدوا يضربوا نار كلهم في نفس اللحظه.
جاي منين الضرب؟ ولا من الوقتين دول؟
جريت من عند كوبري قصر النيل، وكانوا بيجروا ورانا، ما فهمتش هما بيجروا ورانا على الكورنيش ليه، هما عايزين يفضوا المظاهرة، فهي المظاهرة اتفضت خلاص. كانت كلهم خلصت، لازم حد يصعد، هما مش هيصعدوا. السؤال الثورة انتهت ده يعني سؤال عام أو مش عارف. هو في حاجة، أنا بالنسبة لي الثورة دي حاجة. الحالة الثورية دي أو اللي هنسميها أيا كانت هي ما انتهتش، ده أكيد.
بعمل أفلام، بخرج أفلام.
Okay, I'll
25 يناير
do this.
كنت عايشة حياتي العادية يعني بعمل أفلام.
This is something he will hopefully talk about
يعني
later.
بدرس حياتي العادية جدا يعني ملهاش أي علاقة.
We're not playing it all, it's only a minute. I just want to show you something that Lail will want to talk about later, and you need to see an example of it. Okay, I don't know what happened, but we lost you. Are you alright? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
And you can see everybody?
Yes.
Okay, so we've, I don't know whether you were able to see it or not, but we played the trailer with Sana Saif.
يعني بدرس حياتي العادية جدا يعني ملهاش أي علاقة بالسياسة خالص.
So you can stop the video there and we can play it from there. Okay. Right. So moving on to the Words of Women project, then, of which we've seen the trailer. Can you say something about how the project started, how you chose the women you interviewed, what happened with the subtitling, how did you arrange this, and was it taken into consideration from the beginning, or was it an afterthought? Whatever you want to talk about, really.
Mm-hmm. Before I start, I can't really see the audience, but is that Nazli Hussain in the audience? No. Is that Nazli? No?
You can't see the audience?
I can see them, but I can't see faces. Is that Nazli? Do I see Nazli Hussain there?
Nazli?
Yeah? No?
Is Nazli
the producer?
there?
No? Okay.
Who's
Nazli is the
Salma
producer of Words of Women, and I thought I could see her in the audience, but maybe I'm mistaken. So basically, Words of Women started in 2011 as an idea. It started online as a Facebook album, to be honest. After the Egyptian Revolution started, a lot of media was reporting about what's happening, and they were focusing on the typical, mainstream representation of Arabic protests and protests in Arab-speaking countries, men all the time. There were photos of women coming out, but they were just here and there, not with no real focus. And I started reading the typical, liberal white discourse of where are the women in the Arab world? Where are the women in all these so-called Muslim countries? A question that I always find very outrageous, because I never hear it. When I lived in Spain for 11 years, and we were protesting for a long time, and we had the square and everything, and nobody was sending questions saying, where are the Spanish or the Catalan women? They only ask these questions when it comes to non-white countries. So what I did was collected a bit of photos that I found on the internet, and I posted them on a public album on Facebook and through a website, a feminist website in Lebanon called Sawt al-Niswa. Funnily enough, this album became viral, and until today, there's still blogs that wrote about this album saying that Layl Zahra Murtada is an Egyptian woman who risked her life to take photos of Egyptian women on the streets. And I got really tired of writing them and telling them that, hey, please don't, I'm not a woman. I don't know what I am. I don't know if I'm a man or a woman, but I'm not an Egyptian woman to begin with. This is for sure. I know. Actually, it's still on Wikipedia. It's in the Egyptian Revolution page. If you go, there's a part about the struggle of women, and in that part, they speak about me as an Egyptian woman who took photos of other Egyptian women on the street. And I tried to fix it, and I couldn't. So the album started, and then I came to Egypt, and when I was there, I remembered the interviews I had made in Kurdistan, and I was like, wow, maybe I could actually try to find the woman in the photos and turn the photos into videos. Of course, this was really hard, because I only had, these photos were random photos that were taken in demonstrations, so it was really hard to find a specific woman. So we formed a team. People who really also believed in the project and believed in the revolution. It was very important for us to stress that this project was not an external project like journalistic or artistic exploration of the role of women in the revolution. It was more another tool that is probably not important today, but in a matter of few years, hopefully it will play its role in the writing of the history or the herstory of the revolution. So the team was formed. Nazli Hussain, Aida Al-Kashif was in the beginning, Ziad Hawass, Layla Sami, Sandy Sham'oun, and Nadim Murtada. Sorry if I forgot anyone, but I think that's it. So we made this team, and between all of us, we were deciding on what kind of women we're going to interview. In the beginning, we were kind of going towards women who are active. The way we understood, they were actively participating in the revolution, mainly being in the square. And one particular episode changed my complete understanding of the project. It's the episode we have with Muna and Hanan, the mother and daughter. It's known by a lot of people as the episode of the mother and the daughter. Hanan is Muna's mom, and she gave us one of the most inspiring interviews, in my opinion. She was not in the square, but she was participating on the outside. And that's when we decided to kind of like expand the project to include more people. In 2011, we just filmed 3 trailers. One of them was with Sana. And these trailers was mainly to find funding for the project. It took us almost a year to find funding, and we started filming in 2012. We reached a point where we ran out of money, so we kind of stopped. We recorded in total, I think, 22 or 25 interviews. I'm not really sure. 11 of them were edited, and the rest are still in the archive, in the hard disk, which is sitting right next to me now. The initial idea was to start like before I went to Egypt. Actually, my idea was to spend like few months in Egypt, and then move to Tunisia, and then and then Syria started. So I was like, okay, I will add Syria on the list, and then go to Bahrain and like interview women also in Bahrain, and to do. It was mainly not that I would do all the interviews, but that I would start these different projects in different countries. So I would start like do a couple of episodes in Egypt and then hand it over to a local team, and then go to Tunisia, start it over there and hand it to the local team, and then move to other places. To be honest, I got completely sucked into the Egyptian revolution by my mind, heart and soul and everything about me. And I decided that I'm going to stay in Egypt and just be with the people I love and the people I believe in what they're fighting for. And I spent my time there, and I didn't go to Tunisia, and I didn't go to anywhere else, to be honest. And that's where the project stopped.
What's happening with the archive, Leil? I mean, is there any plan for doing something with that?
Yes, there are plans. The thing is that I'm still not sure about what is the best plan for the archive. There has been a lot of offers from different archives around the world, from universities, from NGOs, that they would like to have this archive. I'm still not sure, and I would like to look into some legal information, mainly because of the woman who trusted us with these stories. We did not film in a conventional way of filming. The filming process was, I think, very intimate. It was more in a family context, and I think a lot of the women told us stuff that in other contexts would not tell on camera. So I would like to make sure that these stories are put in trustworthy hands, and they're put in the hands of people who would not abuse them or do stuff with them that the women do not necessarily agree with.
And of course, the full versions of the 11 interviews that are online, as well as the rest of the archive that hasn't been edited, all that is not subtitled yet, right?
All of that is what?
Is not subtitled yet.
No. That I would love for it to be subtitled, but it's a massive job. I mean, the interviews range between 1 hour, 2 hours.
Yeah.
Most of them go closer to 2 hours, so it's an immense amount of footage that we have that needs to be subtitled. I mean, there has been offers from certain archives around the world that they would like to take it and subtitle it and make it available there as a public archive, but I'm still not sure. And on this level, for example, Musserrin is a group that I'm really inspired by, and I completely love and respect. So I'm waiting to see what they're going to do with their archive, and then decide what I'm going to do with my archive. I will copy them.
Which group is that? I don't think we heard. Sorry? Musserrin. Oh, sorry. Okay, I missed that.
Yeah.
Okay. How about the subtitling aspect specifically? I know that you did most of the subtitling into English yourself. Is that right? And you had native speakers of English proofread or edit what you produced. But then the subtitling into Spanish was done by other people, and actually one of the main subtitlers into Spanish is here with us. Where is Ethel? Can say hello to somewhere. There in the corner. I don't know if you can see her.
Hola, Ethel.
You gave them certain guidelines to do with gender, because gender is one of your big issues. Do you want to talk a little bit about the treatment of gender and the thinking behind that? explain to people into Spanish, of course, not into English, because English is not marked for gender, so it doesn't help you do what you want to do.
Yeah. The English translation into Spanish was done from English, and I mean, like, probably Ethel can actually talk about it. She's there, and she was the one who did it, so probably she can give a better idea on why did we use the X instead of the A and the O. If she wants to, I don't know. I can't really see her. I can't see her facial expressions.
Do you want to, Ethel? She wants you to talk about it.
Okay. Okay. So the Spanish subtitles were done by Ethel and Elena, and it was done from English. I would have loved for it to be done directly from Arabic, because I think, like, when we translate from one language into another language without going to the original, it would lose a bit of the content. And I would have loved for the Spanish subtitle to go, because Ethel, for example, is a professional translator and interpreter, and she did an amazing job. And sometimes after reading the subtitles that she did with Elena, I would go back to the English one and I will modify it to meet, because they did a much better job, basically, than me and Nazli and the rest of the group who was working on the English subtitles. There were certain considerations to do with the Spanish subtitles, mainly when it comes to gender. Spanish is very similar to Arabic in the sense that the plural has a gender. So if you say a group of people, then this group of people would be a group of men, actually. Or a masculine people, let's say, not a group of men. And there was a debate that started, we did not start it, it's an ongoing debate within Spanish-speaking circles of why the plural is always in masculine. And I think it can echo perfectly in Arabic. Why do we always, whenever we read the newspaper or we watch whatever lecture we watch or anything we watch, the plural is always in masculine. Like the feminine plural is always restricted to women-only groups, but once there's one man and 10 women in the group, the plural will immediately become masculine. And this is something for me, I think personally, on a personal level, is very important, and a political level, it's also important. I will start with the personal. I personally do not identify with being a man, and I don't identify with being a woman. I think my gender is still something in the shaping. I'm still working on it. I'm 36 years old, and I still don't know. So at certain contexts, I feel more like a woman. In certain contexts, I feel more of a man. So I don't know. I'm still playing with it, and I would like it to remain like this for the rest of my life, hopefully. So I do not identify with the language that is being spoken, and I think language does shape the way we think about our bodies, the way we think about our sexualities, the way we think about our genders, and the way we think about our societies. Based on all of these things, I felt that it is important to reflect this in the Spanish subtitles. Also, after discussing it with Ethel and Elena, and deciding to use what we say the non-exclusive language, or the non-sexist language, or the more queer feminist language. So in Spanish, I don't know how to explain it actually, but I will explain it here. So I don't know if you'll be able to see my handwriting. Can you read it?
Todos, todas.
Okay, so todos basically is everyone for masculine, plural, and todas is everyone for masculine, feminine. And in a lot of places, todos is used, as I explained, to refer to groups where men and women are together. So in the recent years, there has been a current that was advocating writing the plural in this way. Basically with an at, the same one that we use for the email, which looks like an A within an O, to kind of talk of a non-masculine gender plural. But this also raised another question, and this is what I like about gender, because gender is not something like people use it so lightly and so simply that okay, a baby is born and this baby has a certain genitalia, then we decide immediately for them if they are a man or a woman, and we strictly decide this decision for the rest of their lives, irrespective of whatever changes they go through and whatever choices they decide to make. And also, like, we're only given two choices at birth. So you're either a man or a woman. There are no options. While historically there has been a lot of options. There has been like third genders. There has been like intersex people. There have been like a lot of other genders that were there, and people did not restrict them to only two. So stemming from this debate, people were saying that if we use this A within an O, this at, like the email at, we are also saying that there's only two genders. There's only men and women, but we wanted to keep like the space a bit more open to other expressions of gender and other expressions of sexualities. So the X was introduced. So now it's advocated in certain political circles to write todos, todas, like this, like the bottom one, with an X. And it's actually still debatable, especially by a lot of the people who are, let's say, from the conservative linguistic fronts who think of language as something that is not constantly changing. Like, I think language does change. I mean, it's very clear that today, for example, Google is a word. Like, you can hear people telling, like, Google it. Like 10 years ago, nobody would have said Google it. And if you would have said Google it, people would be like, what the hell, what is this? And now you don't need to explain it, you can just say it. So language is constantly changing, and I think we should totally be like critical to what language we are using all the time. So this was the political choice that we decided in the Spanish subtitles, to use the non-gendered or like the queer feminist conjugation or way of writing, basically.
It's not only the plural forms, of course, Leil, it's also the singular, amigo, amiga, am I right?
Yes.
And it's
Yes.
also the same in Arabic. So when Nada Zatuna says واحد صاحبنا يموت ويموت مقتول, she doesn't mean necessarily a male. She's saying in general, when you have a friend who dies and dies murdered. So you applied it to both. But with both with the at and with the X, it's not something you can pronounce, is it? How would you pronounce it?
You do not pronounce the X, and it's usually pronounced as the feminine plural. Mainly, not to say, because like, a lot of people are critical about it, and they say, but if you're pronouncing the feminine plural, you're excluding the men-identified people in the group. But funnily enough, when you start pronouncing when you're in a group of people and there's like 10 women and 4 men, and you use the plural feminine, the first thing that everybody says, like women and men, they laugh. That's their first reaction. Like, they laugh and they're like, why are you talking about all of us as if we're all women? And what I like about this is that it generates debate, it generates discussion, and it opens this debate to, why are we using the feminine? Okay, but if I say todos, why am I using the masculine? Nobody questions that. So I don't think there's a solution at the moment. The debate just started like a few years ago, actually, but it's a long debate. Changing language takes time, but it's still ongoing, and I think we should continue challenging. And today, this is why I wanted you to, apart from the fact that I don't usually refer to myself as like, or ask people to refer to me as he, but I liked how you were also struggling in the beginning to get out of this social construction of he or she. Especially that for a lot of people, they would see me, they would see like, I have a beard, I look like their social construction of what a man is, so they don't really understand, especially in Arab-speaking countries, like my cousins don't understand, why don't want to be a man, which is like an amazing thing. And I don't have a problem with people who are men, it's just like I don't feel as such.
Yeah, but making decisions like these for yourself is one thing, and deciding to apply this, and you do apply it in the Spanish systematically for all the videos, where the speakers are women, and as we discussed earlier, they themselves don't use this strategy. So when Nada Zatuna says, واحد صاحبنا يموت ويموت مقتول, she's using this masculine singular in Arabic in order to say any of our friends. Can you reflect a little bit about the
Yeah.
ethical implications of these choices that you take on behalf of the women you represent in
Yeah,
some way?
I will. We had a discussion, like mainly. I don't remember if Ethel was there, but I remember clearly that I spoke to this about this with Elena, the other wonderful person of the Spanish translation team, and we decided that we will not use. Like, for example, now when I talk about myself, even in the singular form, I would use the X. If I say amigo or amiga, I would still put the X. But I felt that the women most of the women that we spoke to, or all of them, do identify as women. And I didn't want for us to impose any political thing on them. So the adjectives where they refer to themselves in Spanish, they were left with an A. So if I'm giving amiga because it's like the easiest word probably for people, non-Spanish speakers to understand. So if they say amiga about themselves, we kept amiga in its feminine form. But if they say واحد صاحبنا مات and they're talking about everyone, and we know that they're talking about everyone, so we use the X, because these women did mean everyone, did mean man, woman, and etc., queer, non-gendered, trans people.
Okay. I'm going to leave time for questions, but one last question from the audience. But one last thing you might comment on is you kind of went over it very quickly, is the use of English as an intermediate language, specifically English as a colonial language, which I think you have reflected on as well. What does that do to the whole process?
I wish we would reach a point where we're not using English. Funnily enough, that both of us are like Arab speakers and we're using English, speaking at a conference in Cairo. That's like a massive contradiction.
Yeah.
But I wish we would reach a point where English as a colonialist language is not the only language we can talk to each other internationally. But until now, we don't have another option. And when we started translating the project, and I was telling friends of mine or like people that I'm involved with politically that I will be translating it into English and Spanish, the first reaction was that, oh great, you chose like two of the biggest colonialist languages in the world, because English is a colonialist language and Spanish is a colonialist language as well. And we tend to forget in Arab-speaking countries as well that Arabic, to a certain extent, in certain countries, is a colonialist language. It kind of took over local dialects, it took over like local languages. If you talk to comrades from the Kurdish liberation movements, they would tell you they would have a completely different feeling to Arabic. If you talk to people from southern Sudan, they have a completely different relationship to Arabic. The Amazigh, the Berber, there's a lot of ethnicities around the Arab-speaking countries that were affected by the colonialist aspect of the Arabic language.
Sure.
So I wish we would reach a point where we do not have to use these colonialist languages to talk among each other. And I think the only reason is that we would learn as many languages as possible, but not everybody can. And we had to make a certain compromise during the project to get the message across.
Yeah.
So we did English, we did Spanish, we did the other colonialist language, which is French. We did Italian, which was also a colonialist language, funnily enough.
Yeah.
And we had a couple of episodes that we translated into Urdu, but they're not included on the main page, and for a lot of technical reasons mainly.
Yeah. Okay, I think I should stop here and allow the audience to ask you a few questions, interact with you. Are you happy to take questions now?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Questions? Shall we start? Perhaps Adam and then over there. I don't know where the wind is coming from.
First, I would like to thank Leil for actually. I would say that I would love if you were here present, but actually having you here virtually is an act of deconstructing the official power of some oppressive authorities. And as a matter of fact, you're occupying a much larger space on the screen. So I'm much happier having you online. My question is regarding this Her Story let's say, title that we have this Words of Women from the Egyptian Revolution as a her story project. Was it really the reason behind it that you're having a her story as opposed to his story, or you were just collecting data and information about women from the Egyptian Revolution to oppose the public narrative, and then the her story came as a wrapping in the end? Am I making myself clear?
Can you hear Leil?
I couldn't hear properly. I could hear the sound, but I couldn't get. I'm terribly sorry. It's the connection, I think.
Okay, I'm asking that the her story wrapping and naming the project as a her story project, was it the main reason?
I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but I can't understand what you're saying.
The her story wrapping of the project and naming the project as her story. Do you want to say?
Okay, the wrapping of the project as a her story, did it come in the beginning and it was the main motive and reason, or it came in the end?
Was it something that came at the beginning, or did it develop later? I think he mentioned that it came at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it came at the beginning mainly because I was involved in I wasn't really involved. I was close. I was living with the people who were doing this project in Barcelona. That was called hair story, and it's not a term that I invented. It's a term that already exists. There's a lot of different projects, especially within let's call it like anarchist and like anarcho-feminist groups around the world. So hair story is it's a term that is being used in Europe, for example. They use it quite a lot to look into like in Spain in the Inquisition period, how the women were treated, like a lot, especially in Europe, like with stuff related to witches, lots of women who got killed under the accusation of witchcraft. So looking into all this history, hair story is being used. So it's not something that I invented. So we used it from the very first day when we started, basically.
Leil, we have another question, and because you can't hear the other microphone, the person asking the question is moving here. And can I ask who else wanted a question? There were several.
I'm sorry that everybody has to go through this hustle, but blame the immigration office.
Yeah. Was there somebody else who there were? Can you come down while so you can start now?
Well, thank you very much for joining us, and just want to commend your bravery in the work that you did. You delineate white countries when you were discussing, I guess, the dynamic of creating this project. And it made me think of how the issues of race, sub-Saharan slavery, and sub-Saharan African refugees in Egypt affected the telling or the recording of women's voices in the Egyptian Revolution. And if you could discuss that. If you came across those issues.
Do you want to take one question at a time, Leil, or several?
As you guys wish. You are the people suffering with all these technologies.
No, we're not suffering at all. We're enjoying ourselves.
Yeah.
What do you prefer? One at a time?
I'm fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I can take a couple of.
You want another one, or you want to answer this one first?
Yeah, I can quickly answer this one.
Okay.
When we're trying, I don't know if, to be honest, excuse my ignorance, but we were not particularly aware of like, especially because we were focusing on the revolution itself, on women who were activists, who were part of the mobilizations that were happening, and I did not meet in the square refugees or migrants who are coming from basically like from sub-Saharan Africa. There was a very interesting chapter in the recording that when we started interviewing activists from Nuba, and I'm a bit careful about talking about Nuba because I know some of my Nubian friends identify as Nubians and some of my Nubian friends identify as Egyptians. So I cannot freely talk about this issue, but it did come out in this particular episode of Words of Women. They talk about racism within the Egyptian society against Nubian people and against people of color in general, which I think can go under the sub-Saharan refugees. as well. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. I'm sorry.
Seems to say yes. So we're going to
Okay.
take the next question. If somebody has another question, if they could make their way down here. Sorry about that. But we have next question, and just so you can see the person asking you.
Hi.
Hi.
Well, a quick comment. I really appreciate your approach to language. Is great. And my first, it's a comment. Gender neutral in English. Well, when we write, I suppose someone is already using it. We have it, right? We have seer and here. And why do you choose to use they instead of that? Which is quite linguistics. And then the second one, which has more to do with translation, is I think you've already thought about it, and a lot of times, but you have translated into European and Western languages. So we're talking about English as a colonialist lingua franca. I think we're changing the language, and by translating only in European languages, could also, we're translating into other European languages only because it is relevant to this part of the world, maybe. And how about translating into other cultures? Would that be relevant or not?
I choose they basically because a lot of my friends and I believe that they is more accessible than the other gender neutral pronouns up until today. I'm aware of a lot of gender neutral variations, but I think, to be honest, out of my personal experience, when I'm talking to people or I'm meeting people, it's always like they seems more accessible to them than remembering if they should use Z or the other gender neutral, because they always forget, and it's always it either turns into a joke, and I really don't I like to joke about my gender and play around with it, but depending on which context. So this is briefly why I decided to use they. And it's not me, it's already, as I said, it's stuff that's already being used. Concerning colonialist language, or mainly European languages, I agree with you in general, but I disagree on one point, which is despite Spanish being a colonialist language and a European language, it's spoken way more outside of Spain than it is spoken in Spain. And I was very much interested in Latin America. And this was apart from me living in Spain, so I had a bit of bias towards that country, that I wanted my friends also to understand what's happening in Egypt. I had Latin America in mind. I wish that we could have subtitled, or if we'd still be able to subtitle the project into non-European languages. And to be completely honest, the reason why we chose these languages was the amount of effort and the amount of time we had. We were, while we were producing the project, we were not only producing the project, we were also part of the mobilizations. We were part, and also if you look on YouTube, we even have I'm not sure if it's still there, we had certain weeks where we put short videos saying this week there's no episode because there has been demonstrations and we didn't have time to edit, or there's been demonstrations and we are in front of police stations dealing with the detainees, so we didn't have time. So we didn't have the time frame, nor the funding, nor the power, I was about to say manpower and just regret it for the rest of my life. So people power to do it, to translate into other languages. I wish that now during the conference, having so many, I think, people interested in language and translation, you can come up with mechanisms where we can translate into other languages that are not the colonialist white European ones.
Hi. Hi, yeah, I'm Alisa, and I'm so glad to have heard this for so many reasons. I'm aware of your project. I also worked with Leila Sami, who shot most of the interviews for my Filming Revolution project, and some of the people you interviewed, I also interviewed if they were filmmakers. So also I will be correcting an article for the website where I believe I refer to you as she, from all of the pieces I read on the internet as you referred to, so that's good. I'm really happy to hear you talk about the project. I think it's a great project, and I've looked at it, well, I wouldn't say fairly closely, but I have looked at quite a lot of the interviews. I'm sure there's much more to it than I've seen, but I'm thinking about, in our effort to redress history, to be inclusive of women, like your project, do we also risk at the same time marginalizing? So we put women to this side and say, yes, women were active too, when we know fully well that they're central. And so I guess the way I tried to address that with my Filming Revolution project was to interview loads of women. And I didn't do 50-50. In fact, I'm sure I did quite a lot more interviews with women without any excuses or apologies. That it's fully integrated and there's, absolutely not a question, has been my strategy. And I come from probably second wave feminism, where they invented the term herstory and where they were trying to change language. And this is very deep in my roots of political activism. But I've somehow chosen, maybe it's another compensation, to try and do an integrative approach and just say this is the world as I see it. How do you deal with that question of marginalization?
Just I really like your question, but I want to maybe be clear. Marginalization, you mean of a section of women, or marginalization of other genders like men, for example?
No, I don't worry about marginalizing men, to be honest. That would be ridiculous. No, the way in which it often happens when we highlight women's participation, it's as if it needs to be highlighted separately, and not assumed to be central and absolutely vitally important to the whole narrative. That's what I mean.
Yeah. Wow, this makes the question way more interesting. It's let me talk about it as a queer person, or like as mainstreamly known. Like, it's much easier for people to refer to me as gay than queer, because it relates much easier. Like, sex sells, basically. So gay relates more to sex, and queer is more like theoretical gender. No. So I will talk about this so that I will not be speaking in the name of women. There's a big debate that I've always had, and a big contradiction inside of myself, when I hear that people refer to artists or like to writers or to actors as oh, this is a gay or a queer actor, this is a lesbian actor, this is a lesbian writer, this is a woman, or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but why do we need to say that? Part of me says that, and another part goes like, I say that I talk about my sexuality not because I want to, but because if I don't talk about it, it's completely invisible in society. And this is how I relate to focusing on women or focusing on queer people. I have friends who say to me sometimes, okay, we've been friends with you for 20 years. Why do you have to constantly mention your sexuality? We do not talk about our sexualities. They're like straight or like heterosexual people. And I'm like, yes, of course, because you don't need to talk to. Like, if my mom says that I met my sister and her husband, she is talking about their sexualities, but nobody notices it because it's part of the daily language that we use. But when I talk about myself, if I don't always use these adjectives, people will automatically assume that I'm a heterosexual. So with marginalizing, make the woman, through our focus on them, or through the focus of words of women on women specifically, being looked as if we are as a team saying that, oh, look how great these women did. They are women and they still did what they did. This is not the message, and I agree with you that it could be easily mistaken as such. But this is why we made it very clear in the description, for example, on Facebook, in the description of all the literature that we distributed as publicity material about the project, to highlight the fact that it did not come to us as a surprise. We're not highlighting it because we think that it's surprising that the women did what they did. We're highlighting it because they were part of the Egyptian revolution, as they are part of every other thing in history, but people tend to avoid it, and history tends to marginalize their voices. And luckily, I think, I'm happy that you asked this question, because I think it's always this kind of question, up until now, maybe it exists outside, but up until now I only heard it within like radical and like queer feminist groups that are discussing, that are worried about this more than the outer society, and this enriches the debate quite a lot. There's a collective that I really like called Female Pressure. They work mainly on music. They do every year, they issue a report on the participation of women musicians in festivals to kind of like highlight how little women musicians are represented in the music industry. And I'm not talking about the music industry, I'm not talking Beyonce and Lady Gaga, I'm talking like people like us. And there's also like this debate is very fertile within these circles as well, saying like some women DJs or some women musicians say that we don't want to be identified as women DJs, we want to be identified as DJs. But going back to what I said about my sexuality, probably I would stop identifying the way I'm identifying when discrimination stops happening. I have an identity because there's a counter identity that's discriminating against me. And this is how I understand the whole women issue. Did that answer you? I would really like to continue this debate.
Did it answer you, Elisa? Mostly.
Okay.
Is that good enough? Okay. Any other questions, or we only really have maybe a minute or less? No. Anything you want to say, Leil, before unfortunately we lose you in cyberspace?
Nothing. I just want to say that what I always say whenever I talk about Words of Women, that it's just one cross section. I have a very good friend of mine who I think must be around if she's in Cairo, Karima Khalil, who was really pushing for the project to continue, for the documentation to continue, because the 20 interviews or the 25 interviews we've made are only a small, tiny cross section. And the more interviews we filmed, the more we went back home and said, oh, we need to interview still this person and this person and this person, and the list is endless. There's unbelievable cultural heritage within the Egyptian revolution that's not being documented. And final thing that I would like to say is that my dream is that one day probably talk about the participation of queer people in the Egyptian revolution, of the gay and lesbian and the trans people who were there in Tahrir Square participating, but they did not declare their identities due to a lot of like social consideration and like repression from the state and from society. So her story is a really big thing, and it starts by documenting even our small circles, like our grandmothers and our like aunties, and recording like with them like short videos and keeping these stories. This is popular history, and it should be part of our memory as a collective.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very, very much, Leila. It was really lovely to see you again. We would have loved you to be with us, but once we get to a stage where you can get a visa to enter Egypt, we'll have to organize another conference.
أول ما نسقط النظام مش هنخاف نقولها هيسقط النظام.
I didn't catch that. What did he say? Okay. So when that happens, we'll have another conference just for you. Okay, thank you, Leil. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, we have a short break now, and then there are the first lot of parallel sessions. There is session 2 is in here with Tahiyya and Asel. And session 3 is on tweeting and blogging in cyberspace, and activism and translation in cyberspace is in the library. If you don't know where the library is, it's just across the street, but the door is around the corner, the entrance. Just ask anybody, and they will point you in the right direction.